it's been a little bit over a week since the Nintendo Switch 2 Direct, and it's very safe to say at this point that, yes, this console is going to be a success. All the backlash is going to be ineffectual. The console is going to sell gangbusters. It's going to be this very well-received thing, and it is going to put PlayStation, Xbox, and PC into the ground. I think people are really underestimating just how good of a position Nintendo is in right now. Like, you keep seeing people like say things like, oh, Nintendo's due for like one of their bad selling consoles, or like, they think PlayStation or Xbox are going to make some glorious comeback. There's rumors that the Xbox handheld is going to be a thing, and that like the Steam Deck exists. Like, there's all this talk, and like I'm sitting here going like, none of that matters. Xbox and PlayStation are not competitive with Nintendo. Steam Deck was not competitive with Nintendo. Nobody can do what Nintendo does, right? It's just not possible. When Sega said that like Genesis does what Nintendo don't, what they really meant was go out of business, because Nintendo just rakes in money all the time on older hardware, through movies, through parks, through merchandising. They are absolutely killing it. And right now, the Pretendos are running scared. They're trying to meme like something like things into reality, like complaining about games never going on sale. They do. Complaining about Nintendo's new leadership. Claiming that like Furukawa and Kimishima are businessmen who don't respect the gamer, and that simply isn't true at all, especially in Kimishima's case, but whose entire purpose, when he was CEO of Nintendo, was to like continue Iwata's plans for the company. Like, again, like you just have all these people, coming out just coping and seething about the inevitability of another Nintendo success story, because they know that like once this console comes out and once it becomes successful, there will be no gaslighting people anymore. For the past decade, we've already kind of seen like narratives against Nintendo kind of crumble to dust, like the age-old claim that they censor games or that they don't make games for adult gamers, like none of that was ever true, but until like the past decade or so, back when they first announced Bayonetta 2, that was a narrative that was still like very, very deeply entrenched in the Western gaming sphere. And I would argue it still would be if Western third parties did not drop the ball so hard when it came to developing new games to keep people interested in like Xbox and PlayStation. Like if third parties had been able to like continue off of that momentum with the PS360, like there might be a lot more like basis for these claims against Nintendo. This idea that they aren't visually competitive, that their hardware is trash, that like they just remake the same thing over and over again. A lot of this stuff might have a lot more momentum if they had any real competition, but they don't. Like 2024's Astrobot kind of demonstrates that pretty clearly, where the entire gaming industry formed this like Marvel Ultimate Alliance to try and like take down Nintendo's Infinity Gauntlet of platformers. And they just failed, like they gave Astrobot a Game of the Year award, tried to call it like one of the best 3D platformers ever made, and it just fell flat on its face. It's going to be severely outperformed by Bonanza come July. And it's honestly not even going to be remembered. It's not remembered now. Like 2023 has Baldur's Gate 3, a game that people put up against The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. And yeah, it's not as remarkable. It's not as interesting. It's not as relevant. Zelda's bigger than D&D ever was. Bigger than Lord of the Rings ever was. So this idea that like, that people had that like, oh, Baldur's Gate 3, it's so deep and complex and you can have sex with so many different things. It's like, that doesn't make a better game, I've always said that like Baldur's Gate 3 is the Twilight of video games. It's the same exact argument. Like, oh, I want to fuck the characters, so that makes it good. No, that means it's porn. You degenerate. And now, like 2 years later, nobody remembers Baldur's Gate 3. Nobody talks about it, and fans are making like a really bad name for themselves. I myself have been screamed at in public for not liking it. So it's like, it's one of those things that, like, it's been getting this really negative reputation, exactly like Twilight did back in the day. It's amazing to see happen, but yeah, Baldur's Gate 3 could not compete with any of Nintendo's properties, let alone Zelda. And then you have like Elden Dingling, a game that flopped when it came out, was irrelevant, was propped up only by game journals, desperate to have some kind of W. And what happens? Not only does the game get ported to the superior Nintendo Switch 2 platform, it's also getting a new entry exclusive to the Nintendo Switch 2, right? FromSlop knew that they couldn't compete with Nintendo, and so they bent the knee and jumped ship, because Sony wasn't going to bankroll Bloodborne 2, So, like, again, the past 3 years of like game of the year contenders, winners, the big major games that have come out that have been propped up as like major Nintendo killers, like games that 20 years ago would have been games like, Final Fantasy X or Metal Gear Solid or things like that, these huge, like, just well-received popular games that were popular decades after release. Not going to happen with these releases. Like, Astrobot didn't even last through that year, honestly. So, like, Baldur's Gate 3 didn't last 3 months. Elden Ring only stayed relevant because of the shit stain on the Turd Tree DLC, right? So, like, when you take all that into consideration, when you see like what's actually happening in the gaming space, like, what you're seeing is that the games that people actually like and enjoy are all exclusive or available on Nintendo hardware. There's no reason to spend $5,000 on a PC for an unoptimized port of some Japanese game when you can just buy a Nintendo Switch 2 for a fraction of that price and not only play that game, but also everything else that's exclusive to that platform, right? There is no reason not to own a Nintendo Switch 2. And that's the issue that a lot of people are having trouble with right now, is that people are still coping and seething that, like, well, I only play third-party games, and I have a gaming PC for that. I only play on mobile. Like, nobody cares, okay? like, if you like video games, you're gonna want to get a Nintendo Switch 2 for the unique titles and experiences that it offers, okay? There is no emulating it. There's no getting it anywhere else. There's no sidestepping Nintendo or, like, waiting until they go out of business. It just isn't going to happen. And that's become very readily apparent over the past several years. And we're still in this weird phase where people are still refusing to admit it. They're doing everything they possibly can to just dig their heels in and try and tell us that, like, Nintendo's failing. Tears of the Kingdom bombed at like 21 million units sold. Like, they try and like push all these narratives, like calling Drag Drive like woke because it has wheelchairs in it, and trying to say that, like, there's nothing to do in the Mario Kart world open world mode. Like, they're trying to do everything they can to keep the narrative towards Nintendo negative, right? And it just isn't sticking, When I see like Moist Critical or Angry Joe complain about Nintendo, all I see are greasy fucks who don't know anything about the company, who don't play video games, who are completely out of touch, who are YouTuber clickbait scum, like, just making their next round of clickbait. Nothing they say matters. It doesn't hold weight. It doesn't leave an impact. They're not influencing anybody. And that's been very apparent to me for a long time. And seeing them all rally to try and, like, downplay Nintendo Switch 2, chalking up its obvious immediate success as, like, being due to Nintendo fanboys is completely out of touch with, like, the reality of the situation, is that Nintendo is absolutely the best choice for the all-round gamer, right? If you're someone who likes all sorts of different experiences, who likes innovation in games, who likes life sims, platformers, strategy RPGs, action games, like, Nintendo Switch is the easiest way to get a hold of any of that. right? This idea that like it's all going to come to PC is nothing but a cope. And I think with time, more and more people are going to become aware of that.